A few years ago, I started thinking about money in a way that most people do not. Not because I had discovered some exotic investment. Not because I had finally found the one perfect stock. Not because I had suddenly become wiser than the rest of the world. I started thinking differently because I noticed something ordinary and ugly. A great many people do not get into financial trouble through one spectacular mistake. They get there through normality. That is the real danger, not scandal, not collapse, not some cinematic failure everybody can point at and say there. That was the day things went wrong. No, for most households, things go wrong through 1,000 small decisions that looked civilized at the time. They looked reasonable, they looked adult, they looked like what everybody else was doing. That is why they were so dangerous. The world teaches people to fear the obvious financial mistakes. Credit card debt at absurd interest. Gambling, fraud, lavish vacations. They cannot afford speculation in things they do not understand. Those mistakes deserve their reputation. But most people never quite notice the more expensive category, the quiet waste. The purchases that seem normal enough to escape inspection, the costs that arrive monthly, politely, and therefore never feel like a robbery. Even when they are, the obligations people inherit from culture and call choices. That is where a great deal of long-term wealth disappears. I have spent my life thinking about capital, how it grows, how it hides, how it compounds, how it gets destroyed, how the human mind helps or hurts the whole process. And the older I get, the more convinced I become that waste is rarely a single loud event. Waste is usually a leak hidden inside respectable behavior. A leak defended by phrases like everybody does it. That is just how life works. It is only a small amount. This is what adults buy. This is what success looks like. This is what people in my position are supposed to do. Those phrases have cost families fortunes. I want to tell you something very simple. Money does not care whether a drain looks fashionable. A drain is a drain. If enough of them exist, the future ends up underfunded, no matter how intelligent the person was supposed to be. The first of these drains is one people misunderstand because it arrives wearing the mask of thrift, buying cheap. Now, I do not dislike thrift. I admire thrift. I was raised in Omaha by people who understood the usefulness of a dollar waste offended me before I knew why. But cheap is not the same thing as prudent. A cheap purchase often comes with two prices. The first is the one printed on the tag. The second is the one paid later in irritation, replacement, clutter, and distraction. People buy the lower sticker because they want the emotional pleasure of saving immediately. Then they pay again because the thing breaks or annoys them, or sits in a drawer, or never solves the real problem it was bought to solve. That is not thrift. That is delayed spending dressed as discipline. I have watched people fill houses with these decisions. Cheap tools that fail when needed. Cheap shoes that punish the feet every day. Cheap furniture that becomes ugly and unstable so quickly that it must be replaced long before the buyer admits the first bargain was no bargain at all. Cheap kitchen gadgets that promised efficiency and delivered 1 week of excitement and 10 years of drawer space occupation. But there is another cost here that matters just as much. Once people buy the wrong thing, they often refuse to admit it. They keep it because throwing it away feels wasteful. That is the mind defending itself against the truth. The money is already gone. Keeping the useless object does not bring it back. All it does is take up space in the house and attention in the mind. I have always believed that a cluttered financial life and a cluttered physical life are close cousins. Both are full of things someone was too emotionally attached to discard. A bad purchase does not become wise because you keep suffering with it longer. That is true in spending and in life. The real question before a purchase is not only is this cheap, The real question is, what problem am I solving? How often will I use this? And what will it cost if I buy the wrong thing twice? People rarely ask those questions because cheap makes them feel clever. Clever is one of the most expensive feelings in the world when it is false. The second leak is larger and far more dangerous because it carries social prestige. A house larger than you truly need. Housing is where many intelligent people become strangely sentimental about arithmetic. They stop thinking like allocators of capital and start thinking like performers in a social ritual. A lender offers more than they plan to borrow. A nicer neighborhood appears possible. An extra bedroom starts sounding like wisdom rather than luxury. The monthly payment still looks manageable at today's rate, and suddenly a family is not deciding what shelter they need. They are deciding how much of the next 30 years they are willing to sell to a picture in their head. That is what a too large mortgage really is, a sale of future flexibility for present emotional satisfaction. A bigger house is not only a bigger mortgage, it is more interest, more tax, more insurance, more utilities, more maintenance, more furnishing, more repairs, and a larger baseline for everything else that follows. Those costs do not arrive in one neat invoice. That is why people miss them. They arrive a little at a time, and anything that arrives a little at a time is easy for the mind to underestimate. I have often said that a mortgage is not just a payment. It is a commitment to keep earning at a certain level in order to preserve a lifestyle that may have been chosen more for appearance than for actual use. That is a very expensive form of self-pressure. People talk about owning the bigger house as though it were evidence of having made it. Sometimes it is evidence only that they took everything the bank was willing to call affordable and then built the rest of their financial life around defending that decision. A family with a slightly smaller house and a large surplus is often wealthier in every meaningful way than the family in the larger home with no room to breathe. One has options, the other has square footage. I know which one I prefer. There is a strange thing that happens once a person takes on too much housing. Every future decision becomes smaller because the house became too big. Career moves become riskier. Vacations become more performative and less relaxing because the payment machine must keep being fed. Saving becomes something one intends to do later rather than something done naturally every month. Then people say life got expensive. The house consumed margin that should have belonged to the future. That is different. The third leak is a modern one, though the psychology behind it is ancient. Upgrading the phone again and again because the cost has been disguised as something harmless. A person paying cash for a new device every year would feel the absurdity more clearly. But spread the cost over monthly payments, add a trade-in, fold it into a plan, and suddenly the mind stops recognizing it as a luxury and starts treating it as maintenance of normal life. That is how many very expensive habits survive. By becoming ordinary. I am not a romantic about old devices for the sake of looking ascetic. If a tool helps you work better, use it. If your phone is genuinely broken, replace it. If the camera matters to your business, fine. But that is not what drives most upgrades. Most upgrades are driven by restlessness and marketing. The device still works. The battery is imperfect but manageable. The old phone still texts, calls, maps, photographs, pays, and entertains. Yet people upgrade because the monthly amount feels small and the novelty feels refreshing. Over a decade, those small monthly amounts become several $1,000s. That money might not have changed anyone's life in 1 month. But money rarely changes life in 1 month. It changes life when it compounds. And that is the issue with waste. The danger is not what the money would have done this weekend. The danger is what it would have become over 10 or 15 years if it had been left to work. A new phone almost always becomes normal within days. The lost compounding would have become extraordinary over time. One of those things is visible quickly. The other is visible only to disciplined imagination. That is why the wrong one wins so often. The fourth leak is more theatrical, which is why people defend it with unusual intensity. Diamonds. People love to pretend this subject is sacred and therefore beyond arithmetic. I am not against giving beautiful gifts. I am not against jewelry. I am against unexamined myths, sold back to ordinary people at extraordinary markups, and then defended in the language of romance. An engagement ring should cost 1 month's salary, then 2, then 3. Who told people that? The tradition did not descend from the mountain. It was sold that matters. A great many expensive social norms are merely successful advertising campaigns that have survived long enough to become moral language. Diamonds have this advantage over many other products. They are wrapped in love. That makes questioning the spending sound cold. It is not cold, it is adult. A thing can be emotionally meaningful and financially overpriced at the same time. In fact, that is often how the world makes its fattest margins. The buyer is told he is not purchasing a stone. He is purchasing proof of feeling. Now he is trapped. If he spends less, does that mean he loves less? Nonsense. The relationship and the marketing budget are not the same thing. What matters in a marriage is not the size of the stone, but the quality of the partnership. Most people know this intellectually, and then spend as though they do not. There are cheaper alternatives. Vintage pieces, second-hand markets, lab-grown diamonds, different stones entirely, simpler rings, custom work without the retail theater. These options do not reduce love, they reduce markup. There is a difference. I have always found it revealing that people will fight very hard to preserve the illusion that a branded, highly marked up purchase is a meaningful life requirement. It shows how often money is used not to solve needs, but to reduce social anxiety. The fifth leak is more subtle because it flatters the intellect. Luxury purchases labeled as investments. This one amuses me because the human mind is a brilliant defense lawyer for desire. A person wants the expensive chair, the bag, the watch, the premium cookware, the designer coat, the elegant object, and soon enough the mind begins gathering evidence for the case. It is high quality. It will last for years. It improves posture. It improves confidence. It is really an investment in productivity. It might even save money in the long run, perhaps, perhaps not. But most of the time that word investment is being used to reduce guilt, not to describe reality. An investment should grow in value, generate cash, reduce a future cost meaningfully, or produce a measurable economic return. A handbag does not do that. A premium chair might improve comfort. Yes, and for some people that matters enough to justify it. But the fact that something is useful or enjoyable does not make it an investment, and it does not need to be one. That is the point. Adults should be able to say, I bought this because I wanted it, and I could afford it within reason. That is honest. The trouble begins when people cannot tolerate that honesty and start recoding consumption as financial strategy. Once they do that, they stop asking the only sensible questions. Can I afford this without harming more important goals? Would I still want it if no one else ever saw it? Am I buying utility or am I buying a story about myself? The mind loves to justify. Wealth often requires learning when not to believe your own closing argument. The sixth leak is one of the great checkout counter scams of respectable commerce, extended warranties. I dislike them, not because all protection is foolish, but because they are usually sold through fear, priced for the seller's advantage, and offered to people who have not been taught to think probabilistically. The object is purchased. The excitement is still there. Now, someone asked whether you would like protection for just a little extra each month, small enough to say yes without thinking, sensibly framed enough to make no feel reckless. That is excellent salesmanship and often poor buying. Most products do not fail in the period when the extended warranty matters. Many already carry some coverage. Sometimes the credit card provides. Often the likely repair would cost less than the accumulated warranty payments. That is the real arithmetic. The seller is not pushing the warranty because he is worried about your well-being. He is pushing it because it is profitable. Very profitable. That alone should make you cautious. What I prefer is self-insurance through sensible reserves, a small repair fund, cash in the household margin. The same principle that works for emergency savings works here. If you have financial room, you do not need to buy overpriced peace of mind every time a retailer waves it at you. You simply pay the occasional repair when it comes and keep the many months in which nothing breaks. That is a much better business model for your household than paying insurers of toasters and televisions. The seventh leak is not the wedding itself. It is the distance between what the day means and what the industry convinces people the day must cost. A wedding can be one of the few times in life when the people you love gather in one room around something beautiful. That matters. I would never deny it. The waste begins when people stop planning a marriage celebration and start financing a stage production. A venue tour becomes a psychological operation. There is champagne, there are soft lights, there are brochures, there are packages. There is the subtle suggestion that this memory should be worthy of the moment, and that worthy has somehow become very expensive. Then the extras begin. Flowers, reception drinks, photography, the dress, the suit, music, a room the night before, a room the night after, table settings, transportation favors, the cousin who expects this because the other cousin had it, the family pressure that speaks as though restraint were a form of disrespect. Soon the couple is not planning around meaning. They are managing a rolling emotional extortion project funded by future income. If money must be borrowed to host a wedding, the event has almost certainly wandered away from love and into vanity financed by interest. That is too heavy a burden to place on the start of a marriage. I do not object to spending. I object to unconscious spending dressed up as once-in-a-lifetime reasoning. A great many stupid purchases in the world are made under the protection of that phrase. Once in a lifetime, perhaps, but debt from the day can remain for years after the champagne is gone. What matters is not impressing guests who will forget half the details by the next season. What matters is beginning married life with structure, calm, and aligned priorities. That is more romantic than floral theater funded by stress. And finally, there is the leak people dismiss precisely because it is small and familiar streaming subscriptions. This category is useful because it reveals how modern waste operates, not through pain, through invisibility. A charge here, a forgotten renewal there, a platform used for one show and kept for 7 months because cancellation required effort and nobody felt like making the decision. 3 become 5. Each one feels modest. Together they become a steady tax on inattention. That is the real issue. Most people are not paying for what they use. They are paying for optionality they rarely exercise. They are paying for the pleasant idea that they could watch anything, not for actual hours consumed. And because the amounts are not individually large, the mind treats them like background noise. But that is how background noise becomes through repetition. A person who lets small recurring charges multiply without scrutiny is telling the world something about his financial operating system. Not that he is weak, that he is inattentive. Inattention has a price. I know because every serious allocator of capital eventually learns the same lesson. Money likes direction. It does not like drift. Now, I do not want to become ridiculous about any of this. A streaming service you genuinely use can be a fine value. A wedding can be worth real spending. A quality tool or coat or chair can be a good purchase. A diamond can matter to someone in a way that has emotional worth. The point is not to become miserly. The point is to stop confusing normal with harmless. That is the lesson. A life can be financially weakened by perfectly ordinary habits if those habits are never subjected to adult inspection. And that inspection must go beyond the individual transaction. You must ask the deeper question: what category of person am I becoming through repeated choices like this? Am I becoming someone who buys with purpose or someone who defaults? Am I solving real problems or am I obeying scripts? Am I building margin or slowly draining it? Am I consuming capital that should be compounding, or am I intentionally spending on what truly matters to me after I've protected what matters more? That is where wisdom begins. I have always believed that money is not mainly about buying things. It is about buying control over time, control over stress, control over whether a bad month is a bad month or the beginning of panic. When people waste money on normalized leaks, what they are really wasting is they are wasting future margin. And future margin is what gives life its dignity. A person with margin can say no. He can leave bad work. He can absorb a repair. He can think. He can wait. He can invest without immediately needing the market to cooperate. A person without margin is more talented than he looks and more trapped than he admits. That is why I care so much about ordinary waste. It does not only reduce net worth, it reduces freedom. The world constantly tries to teach people that wealth is mostly about earning more. I have watched too many high earners remain anxious to believe that earning helps. No question, but if spending remains unexamined, higher income often just finances a more expensive set of invisible leaks. Then the person says, I make more than ever and still do not feel ahead. Of course not. The holes got larger with the paycheck. That is a common tragedy. One of the finest financial skills a person can develop is not stock picking. It is learning to identify what his culture has normalized that his future cannot truly afford. That takes nerve because normal behavior comes with social protection. If everybody upgrades the phone, the upgrade feels reasonable. If everybody stretches for the larger home, the stretch feels mature. If everybody keeps the subscriptions, buys the warranty, pays the diamond markup, calls consumption investment, and permits weddings to become mini coronations, then restraint begins feeling eccentric. Good. A great many fortunes are built by people willing to look slightly eccentric, while the crowd performs normality on monthly installments. I am not interested in looking normal if normal is expensive. I am interested in owning my choices. And that is the final point I want to leave with you. None of this is about shame. I have wasted money. Everybody has. The issue is not moral purity. The issue is awareness. If you review your spending honestly, if you keep your luxury decisions intentional instead of automatic, if you separate true utility from cultural theater, if you build margin before you build appearance, then occasional mistakes do not destroy you. They become bumps. But if spending is unconscious, if your financial life is governed by default settings installed by retailers, marketers, lenders, tradition, and social comparison, then the occasional mistake is not occasional at all. It is continuous. And continuous small waste is often much more dangerous than rare dramatic stupidity. So look carefully, not only at what you buy, but at what story caused you to buy it. That is where the money really goes. Not into the object alone, into the belief underneath it. Change the belief and the spending pattern changes. Change the pattern and the future changes. That is how quiet wealth is built. Not by one brilliant move, by refusing, again and again, to let normalized nonsense siphon off the capital that should have been buying you freedom.